So let's give a wonderful Salt Lake Center Spiritual Living Center welcome to Guy Finley.
You're adorable. Good morning. We only have a short time together this morning relative to the material that I like to present. So I've condensed what we're going to look at into two stories. I love stories because they help us to feel what our intellect understands. So I want to start with a very simple story today, just to make sure that I'm talking to the right group, because I don't want to be in front of the wrong group. Here's two friends. We'll say their names are Christiana and Samantha, and they've known each other since the days of high school and college, but they went their separate ways. And it turns out that Christiana, a housewife, was coming into town to visit Samantha, who was a businesswoman, and they arranged to meet at a place where they could have a pizza like they used to do when they were younger chums. So and if I get the names mixed up, don't just go with me. So Christiana shows up a little bit late to the pizza parlor, and there's Samantha, and Samantha is collapsed sort of over the table, her face almost in a pizza pie with 2 bottles of wine tilted over. I have the right group, I guess. And she stirs her and she comes back like, "What do you want?" Snapping already. She looks up and she sees that it's her friend Samantha, Christiana. Well, let me straighten this out. Every character in every story is you and I, except for the pizza part. And she says, what's with you? I'm not used to seeing you like this at all. This isn't your character, let alone that you would snap at me. What's happened? And Samantha looks at her friend and says, "You know, I just absolutely had the worst conversation that I've ever had in my entire life. I mean, it was unbelievable. First, I was accused of doing something absolutely terrible. Then I was blamed for the results of the action. And after I was blamed, I was made to feel guilty just for being alive." And Christiana looked at Samantha. "My God, Samantha, who on earth would do that? Who were you talking to?" And there was a pause, and Sam looked at Christiana and said, "Myself." Sam paused and said, "Myself. I was talking to myself." How many of us understand, without having to think about it, that there are often times when, for whatever reasons, someone says something to us, an event goes the way we don't like it. Maybe we just look in the mirror in the morning and it's not what we want to see. And a whole host of conversations will start in our head, denigrating us, telling us that we should be something other than we are, and then even in the same breath of describing how we should be other than we are, starting to tell us one more time again what we should be and how we should get there. And how many times have all of us been involved in a dialogue like that in our own mind, believing that each and every time that conversation starts, somehow or other it's going to lift us out of the malaise that same conversation brought us into. So I want to make sure, does anybody not understand this part? We're all on the same page, aren't we? There's a constant sense of living with something inside of us that is always either saying no, or on the other side saying, yes, you can do this, you can do this. But the point of me being here and all that I talk about is that it is wonderful. There's no question about it. What a great thing to have a community, a supporting community. It is essential for aspirants. But we must never mistake community for the reason it exists, which is to encourage us and bring us to the point where individually we make the exchange that we must for ourselves for what is true. Because unless we make an individual exchange, unless we understand the truth is always saying, Guy, or whatever your name is, will you give this up? Will you see that this no longer serves you? This part of you that talks to you. Spiritual men and women gradually have to wean themselves off of all interior dialogue. Not for the reason of trying to be someone free of it, but because we start to understand that when we are drawn into the world of talking to ourselves, we are drawn into a world beneath ourselves. We are not on this planet, you and I, to serve thoughts and feelings. We are here to understand the nature of this mind so thoroughly, to bring the light of truth into it so completely, that in the clarity that is born of that marriage of above and below, we are given the authority by that love, by that light, by God, to place ourselves in the correct order where every moment of our lives, the exchange is taking place because the light that goes before us makes it evident that what is starting to try to tell me who I am and what I do, or where I did wrong, or how I have to fix something, that nature is not who I am. It is maybe what I've been, and maybe it's brought me to this point. But you and I are here to outgrow ourselves every day. Not to find comfort in what we've been and done, but to find in what we've been and done the foundation in which the seed of truth can grow something completely new. Are we on the same page? I haven't scared anybody yet, have I? A little bit, I can tell by the laugh. So the story that I want to tell you to help make this clear and to give us a certain right emotional feeling based on an understanding that we all have. See, it isn't a question of an individual not having sufficient spiritual understanding. My God, the world today is resplendent, if you will, with meaningful as well as ridiculous material, but hopefully within us we can sort out the difference between these things, because within us lives the very truth that we're seeking. And it is the reliance upon the truth within ourselves that helps us see and make clear the truths that we find outside of ourselves. For instance, when you hear any individual speak the truth, not to make you happy, but to tell you the truth, you know in your heart of hearts, just like Mary was saying, you know what? Kind of drives me nuts sometimes, but I know it's right. Why do I know it's right? Because it already lives in me. And when we hear truths and we recognize them, the recognition of that truth is the invitation to make that truth more and more fundamental in our lives, so that when anything comes along from any direction, we have something new with which to meet that moment, a new understanding. And in that new understanding, to make the exchange in that very moment, which is every moment of our lives. So let's get busy with the story. Once upon a time, and I love stories that have the general theme, as I think most of us do, or they wouldn't have survived for all of these millennia. There was a great king and a great kingdom, and in this great king and great kingdom, there was a series of ways in which individuals living in kingdoms beneath. You know the story. In my Father's kingdom, there are many mansions. These mansions are mansions of understanding, of consciousness. And so our story takes place with someone who is striving, making the exchange. And she lives now, where we find her, having moved into a new part of this kingdom, because in her former life, which, by the way, you and I are meant to have multiple lives in this life. And if we're not, then we're severely missing the mark and allowing what is consoling us to keep us from our true possibilities, which is outgrowing ourselves moment to moment, dying to ourselves. So she finally has gone through something, and she makes this move into this new kingdom. Now, in the old kingdom she was in, just to make sure we're all on the same page, in the old kingdom there were dragons. Does anybody know the kingdom with dragons? Fire-breathing, large, scaly creatures that show up and torch you from time to time. Yes or no? I want to hear it. Okay, absolutely. And you know, when you live with dragons, one of the ways in which you finally get to move into a world where they're at least not as prevalent is when you finally understand their nature. Because germane to everything that I teach is that you and I presently mostly meet moments, dragons, we don't want. And we want to find a way to be more powerful than they are, a way to think around them. We don't want a world in which we are constantly struggling against what seems to oppose us, even with the finest mentality. We want to live in a world in which the moment that we meet whatever it is that appears inside of us, we catch the part that wants to control. We catch the part that wants to massage or otherwise reconcile with intellect or even faith. And instead, we meet it with the wish to illuminate that moment, to bring that very condition that formerly pushed us left and right into an awareness that this moment has come into my life for the sole purpose of allowing me to bring this light of the true life into that and change not just the condition, but the consciousness that's producing the perception of it. So that in the change of my perception, which means a change in my nature, out of the change in that consciousness, the world changes for me and for everyone else around me. And missing that moment is to miss the purpose of our individual existence, which is to become a new order of human being constantly, to be born over and over again, literally. So she moves into this new kingdom. And when she first gets there, because she'd done some battle and learned some stuff about the dragons, about this interior darkness, this part of us. And would you agree with me that anything that wants to drag me into a dark dialogue so that it can triumph over me by bringing up all my problems, is that your friend? Right. So that's the parallel. So here she comes. She gets to her new home, and it's on a beautiful hill, beautiful mountainside, as you would expect. She's grown. She's gone up higher in her life. And that very next morning, she's having her coffee, and she hears a roar. I do the sound effects for free. She walks over to her bedroom window, doesn't see anything outside. She walks over, and here's this railing, and she looks down the hill. And what do you think she sees? How do you know? No, it was a McDonald's. No, she left that behind. Yeah, there was dragons down there. And they were torching the place. I mean, the flames were leaping all around, and the beautiful trees, everything just going up in flames. And she thinks to herself, oh my God, I thought I left all that behind. What am I going to do? And so she does the only thing at that point that a person can think to do, which is she girds herself in her armor that she happened to pack with her. And she goes down into the valley to do battle with the dragons. Fast forward. Dragons 1, heroine 0. Meaning, she engages the enemy as she had done before, but they're of a different order. And I wish I had, as always, a long time to explain these things, but you just have to catch up with me. It's a life we have. And the life that we have belongs first and foremost to what has given it to us. And what has given us this life is the complete order of all energies. And our possibility as a human being is to enter into the worlds above and below, but they must be done simultaneously. We must recognize that just because we've overcome a problem, an addiction, a compulsion, gotten through an abusive relationship, whatever it may be, we have to recognize that that is not the end. That's the beginning of something. Because now you've understood the dragons in the world you were, and by the very fact of the integration that took place that allowed you to have understanding superior to what stood over you, now you're in another world where you will meet other things. And the point of all this, before I get back to the story, is there comes a day in your life, and I tell you this is the truth, even though you must find it for yourself, where you realize that it doesn't matter what is brought before you. It makes no difference what seems to stand and challenge what you are, because you have the capacity as a human being to call upon something living within you already that by its very nature can change what it is brought before. So that an individual enters into a life in which a constant sense of transcending oneself, a constant sense of transfiguration is taking place, and it's always renewed. So she comes back up, and on the way back up, there's like a guardhouse. And there's an old man. She didn't see him on the way down. And the guardhouse and the guard at the gate between the two worlds represents a certain part of ourself that I'll get to at the end of the story. And he's looking at her, and he's got his hands full, and he's just shaking his head. And after you lose a battle, do you like people to shake their head at you? Is that, like it wasn't irritating enough that I looked like a Rice Krispie. Now there's this old guy in a guardhouse shaking his head at me, disdaining, which he isn't, as you'll see. So she goes back into her house, and she's thinking to herself, what am I going to do? The dragons are certainly going to destroy everything. The flames are going to race up this hill. She goes and has a very uneasy night, gets up in the morning thinking she's going to see flames, and she looks down in the valley, and everything's restored. She can't believe her eyes. How could everything be back the way it was when I saw everything destroyed? Now bringing you into it. How many times in your life have you gone to bed after a flame has consumed your life? You wake up in the morning and it's like, oh, I get to do it again? You mean everything that I thought was destroyed isn't really destroyed? Rather, it's somehow restored? But the problem is, it's restored, but I'm still in the same position of fearing it. I'm still in the same world in which I look down and think, my God, these dragons are going to come up and destroy what I have. So as she's looking down at this, she notices something, and what she notices is that not only are there dragons, but there are wizards, and the wizards seem to be interacting with the dragons. The wizards are dressed, some of them in black, some of them dressed in white, but regardless, they're interacting with the dragons, and she kind of comes to an unusual conclusion. She thinks to herself, the problem was I was fighting the wrong thing. I should have been engaging the wizards, not the dragons. Now, what does that mean to us? Well, I tried to straighten out this person, this problem, this overpowering emotion, this compulsion, but I shouldn't have been dealing with that. Instead, I should have been meeting it with that which I believe is going to be more powerful than the dragon. That's what the wizards represent. She thinks the wizards are controlling the dragons. You and I think that the ability to think about our problems is the same as being in control of them. That if I can just reason this out enough times, I'm going to change my reality. No, you're not. No, you're not. We must change the nature. And in order to change the nature, we have to have an understanding about it that can only be won in one way. So she goes down again and she fights with the wizards this time. Wizards won, heroine nothing. Comes back up, guard in the gate, shaking his head at her. Finally, she's kind of irritated. She walks up to him and says, what in the world are you shaking your head at? With whom should I take the fight? If I know I've got to go down there, given the pending doom, I can see the flames, I know they're coming up. Who should I fight down there? And he says to her, listen to me, young lady. Your fight isn't with anything below you. Not with anything below you. She says, what do you mean? He says, don't allow yourself to be drawn into the valley to fight those beasts or the wizards because you feel the fear in you do up here. Stay in your home above them. That is the gift of this new kingdom that you are in. They can't come up here. How many of you love that moment in the movie, and I can't even think of the name, The Hobbit, when the wizard said, you shall not pass. Remember that? Why does that resonate in a human being? He was talking to this dark creature. Why does that resonate in us? Because in our heart of hearts, we understand that we are endowed as a creation to have authority over that which was created within us and beneath us. And there are worlds of creation, and there are things and forces that occupy them. We don't understand our relationship to these things. How do we know? Because we get drawn into the fight. How many of you get drawn into a fight? And don't anybody lie. Raise your hands. If not arguing with yourself, arguing with somebody else, you can wake up in the morning and argue with the weather. Yes or no? And it's so logical. Isn't it? Why? Because I know that I shouldn't have to deal with him or her or this or that. Why is my life this way? Other people have a better life than mine. I'm not as good looking or whatever, or I don't have any of this and that. You know the whine, don't you? All of that is taking place in a world below you, but you are tempted into it. You are tempted into it because something wants to, because something in us wants to keep in place what we call our comfort, what we call our pleasure, what we call what has consoled us. The true spiritual aspirant does not live with consoling thoughts and feelings. The true aspirant understands that at every moment of his or her life, if they're working, they are going to be looking at something that seems to be a problem, when in truth, the thing that you're looking at that may want to draw you into fight with it exists so that you can stand inwardly and recognize anything that is trying to draw me into being afraid. Anything that's trying to draw me into a worry or an argument or relive. How many of you talk to people that aren't even alive anymore? You know what I'm talking about. This conversation that goes on and on. Anything in you that wants to drag you into some conflict, to oppose anything, is not helping you. It is helping itself to your life. You and I are given, in fact, do it right now. When I'm talking in Southern Oregon, come back into your body. Be present, fully present. Come into your body. If I was to say to you, can you easily tell me with your finger the direction, which way is up? Huh? Which way is down? Huh? Why can't I tell that? Why can't I tell that? I'm sitting having my coffee. Oh God, later on today you got to talk to that person who's been doing these things, or you got to go do an interview, or you want to start a business and you're not sure if they're going to, oh God, and your coffee's going like this. Am I going up? Am I struggling with a dragon? And what's the dragon telling me? You need to be afraid. You need to carry this enemy in your heart. You need to resolve this. And you even need to, listen to me, you even need to, it says you need to forgive somebody. How many of you have been hearing for 1,000 years in your head, I need to forgive somebody, and it still hasn't happened because it's still talking to you? You need to know the difference between up and down, between what is light and what is dark. And no one can do that for you. You gain clarity as to the distinction in the difference between what is up, what is down, what is light, what is dark, by giving yourself into these moments where the exchange is possible. And only when we're willing to be that present so that we understand, you know what, I can feel it distantly. I'm sitting here listening to this man talk. I'm going into some of your heads. And I'm thinking, you know, I didn't eat enough breakfast. Because I don't understand what he's saying. Or I don't like what he's saying, and that's why I'm irritable. No, that's not why you're irritable. You and I are in a constant state of living between what is above and below. This is the gift of humanity between heaven and earth, the gift of it. And the answer to the gift is the same as what it means to complete ourselves, to be in communion. And that only happens when we stand between these worlds, in the new world, aware of myself, present. At the same time, I can see all of these things that are trying to draw me into their world, get me involved, to tempt me, to try to complete myself according to whatever it is that my nature is saying I have to do in order to get rid of the dark. You don't have to do anything to get rid of the dark other than stay in the light, to remember yourself, and then in the moment where you feel the temptation, feel that draw to get you into that dark dialogue, to start thinking about yourself again. In that same moment that you feel that, to realize those dragons can't come up to where I live. And what I make the exchange for in this moment is the part of me that wants to go down there and struggle with them. And if I don't go down there and struggle with them, I understand myself ever more clearly, and I begin to die to the part of me that lives in opposition to everything. So in one respect, simple exercise. What is it? Next time I start to feel worried or nervous, stressed, anxious, any kind of contraction, I'm simply going to do the very best I can to come back into my body. Do it now. And I'm just going to notice the difference between up and down. God gave you a great compass. Learn to use it. But to use it, you must be present to its existence, and you must make the exchange of looking at it instead of what you're afraid of. Thank you. Thank you.